"You don't belong here. I don't know how you got past the front door, but I suggest you turn around and walk back out before I call building security." Those were the exact words Elaine Whitfield heard on a Tuesday morning in October, standing in the marble lobby of the Ashford Tower in downtown Toronto. She was wearing her old winter coat, the gray one with the frayed left cuff she kept meaning to replace. She had a Tim Hortons cup in one hand and her phone in the other. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't loud. She was simply walking toward the elevator bank the same way she had walked toward it every Tuesday for the past 4 years. The man who said it was named Patrick Stowe. He was the building's new property manager, hired 6 weeks prior by the firm that handled day-to-day operations. He was in his early 40s, with the kind of confidence that comes not from accomplishment, but from never having been corrected. He wore a lanyard with his photo ID clipped to it, and he stood just far enough in front of the elevator to make it clear he intended to block it. Elaine Whitfield looked at him. She didn't say anything right away. That's something you should know about her. She had this particular quality, a stillness, the kind that makes other people uncomfortable because they're used to people flinching. She just looked at him, took a slow sip of her coffee and said, "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Stowe said. He crossed his arms. Behind him, 2 administrative assistants near the reception desk had stopped typing. A courier by the door had gone very still. This is a private commercial tower, not a public building. You need to have business here or an appointment with a tenant. Do you have either of those things? Elaine considered the question. "I do," she said. "With who?" "With myself," she said. "I'm going to my office." Stowe made a short, dismissive sound, not quite a laugh. "Right. And which office would that be?" "The 22nd floor," Elaine said. He looked her over then. The gray coat, the worn boots, the natural hair, unstyled, pulled back simply. He made a calculation, the kind people like him make quickly and rarely examine afterward, and he decided she was lying. "Ma'am," he said, dropping his voice in a way that was meant to sound authoritative, but landed closer to condescending. "There is no office on the 22nd floor that belongs to." He gestured vaguely at her, someone who walks in off the street. "The 22nd floor is Caldwell Group. They don't take walk-ins." Elaine nodded slowly. "That's right," she said. "They don't." And she walked past him toward the elevator. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know how this kind of story goes. But stay with it, because the details matter here. The details are the whole point. Hit that like button if you think you know where this is headed, and let's keep going. Patrick Stowe was not a bad man in the way that some men in these stories are bad. He wasn't someone who went home and celebrated cruelty. He was something perhaps more common. A man who had absorbed, without question, a certain idea of what success looks like, what authority looks like, what belonging looks like. And on that particular Tuesday morning in October, Elaine Whitfield did not fit any of those pictures. He followed her to the elevator. Ma'am, I need you to stop." He got in front of her again, palm out this time. "I'm going to need to call up to the 22nd floor to verify your appointment before I can let you up." Elaine stopped. She looked at his hand. Then she looked at his face. "You want to call up," she said. "Standard procedure." "To verify," she said, "that I have an appointment, yes, with myself." There was a pause. Stowe didn't blink. He had committed now, and men like him don't reverse course easily once they've committed. "If you do have legitimate business here, this will take 30 seconds, he said. "You won't mind 30 seconds if everything's above board." The courier by the door had given up, pretending not to watch. One of the administrative assistants had turned her chair entirely toward the lobby. Elaine set her coffee cup down on the ledge of the reception desk. She reached into the inside pocket of her gray coat and took out her phone. She didn't hand it to anyone. She just opened it, found what she was looking for, and held it up so Stowe could see the screen. It was an organizational chart. Clean, simple, the kind that gets printed in annual reports. At the top, in the box that sat above every other box, was a name, Elaine M. Whitfield. Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Caldwell Group. Stowe stared at it. Elaine put her phone back in her pocket, picked up her coffee, and pressed the elevator button. "The company," she said quietly without looking at him, "was named after my mother." The elevator opened. She stepped in, the doors closed. Let's go back to the beginning, because Elaine Whitfield's story doesn't start in that lobby. It starts 26 years earlier, in a rented office above a dry cleaner on Danforth Avenue in East Toronto, where a 29-year-old woman with a business degree, a secondhand desk, and $4,000 in savings decided she was going to build something. Her mother, Dorothy Caldwell, had come to Canada from Jamaica in 1971. She worked as a registered nurse for 31 years. She was the kind of woman who ironed her uniform the night before every shift, who kept a small notebook of every patient she'd ever cared for, who told Elaine from the time she was small that you do the work. You do it properly, and you let the work speak. Dorothy Caldwell died of a stroke in the spring of 1997, 8 months before Elaine incorporated the company that would bear her name. Elaine had wanted to call it something else at first, something corporate sounding, something that wouldn't be traced back to anything personal. A mentor talked her out of it. Put her name on it, he said. You'll work harder if you have to look at it every day. He was right. The Caldwell Group started as a small commercial real estate advisory firm. Elaine spent the first 3 years doing work that larger firms didn't want. Small businesses, community organizations, nonprofits trying to negotiate leases in neighborhoods that were changing fast. She drove a 1994 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard. She ate lunch at her desk most days. She returned every phone call within 2 hours because she had read somewhere that the fastest way to lose a client is to make them feel forgotten. By 2003, the firm had 12 employees and had brokered over 40 commercial leases across the GTA. By 2008, when the financial crisis hit and half the industry contracted, the Caldwell Group survived because Elaine had refused to overextend. A decision her then CFO had argued against loudly and repeatedly. By 2015, they had moved into property acquisition and management. By 2019, they owned or co-owned 9 commercial properties in Toronto, Hamilton, and Ottawa. The Ashford Tower was the 10th. She had acquired majority ownership of the building in the spring of that year, a deal that had taken 14 months to negotiate and had involved 3 separate financing arrangements that Elaine had structured herself. The building had 24 floors, 312 tenants, and a lobby floor made of Tivoli marble that Elaine had specifically insisted on keeping when the previous owners had wanted to replace it with cheaper composite tile. She knew every floor of that building. She knew the name of the head of maintenance, a man named Rudy Chen, who had worked in the building since 2004. She knew that the coffee cart on the ground floor made better espresso than the cafe across the street. She knew that the 3rd floor HVAC unit ran slightly warm in the winter, and that the tenants on that side had complained twice. What she didn't know until that Tuesday morning in October was that Patrick Stowe had been hired to replace the previous property manager, a woman named Sandra Ossie, who had left for a position in Vancouver. Sandra had known exactly who Elaine was. Sandra had worked with Elaine directly on 3 lease renegotiations and had sat across from her at a conference table for a combined total of probably 40 hours. Stowe had been there 6 weeks. No one had shown him a photo. No one had told him, apparently, that the building's majority owner was a black woman in her mid-50s who sometimes stopped in on Tuesday mornings before the rest of her team arrived, who liked to walk the lobby and check in with Rudy Chen and drink her Tim Hortons in the quiet before the building filled up. He just hadn't known. That's what he would say later. He just hadn't known. Upstairs, on the 22nd floor, Elaine's executive assistant, a young man named Marcus Tran, had already been at his desk for 20 minutes when Elaine walked in. Marcus had worked for Elaine for 3 years. He was meticulous, funny in a dry way that took people a while to notice, and deeply loyal. He brought Elaine a folder without being asked. Tuesday morning was operations review, and they sat at the small table near the window that looked out over the financial district and went through the week's property reports. She didn't mention what had happened in the lobby. Not then. Marcus mentioned it first, actually, 2 hours later, because Rudy Chen had called him directly. Rudy says there was an incident this morning, Marcus said carefully, leaning against the doorframe of Elaine's office. With the new property manager. Elaine looked up from her screen. He says the guy stopped you at the elevator. He did, Elaine said. Marcus waited. Get me his employment file, Elaine said. And ask Linda in legal to come up at 2. Now, some of you are probably wondering right now, why didn't she say something in the moment? Why didn't she announce herself? And this is the question that gets to the heart of this entire story. So stay with me here, because Elaine actually answered this directly when she spoke about it later. She said, I've had to announce myself in rooms my whole career. I've had to produce credentials, explain my presence, justify my seat at the table. Sometimes in buildings I owned. And somewhere along the way, I made a decision. I decided that my presence doesn't require my justification. If someone can't see what's in front of them, that's information about them, not about me. She paused when she said that, and then she added something quieter. My mother worked 31 years as a nurse. She was asked more than once if she was sure she had the right floor. She always had the right floor. She always knew exactly where she was going. If you're watching this from anywhere in Canada, drop your city in the comments below. And if this story is hitting close to home, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, we've got more coming. The meeting at 2 o'clock was not a disciplinary hearing in any formal sense. Linda Marsh, the Caldwell Group's general counsel, sat on one side of the table. Marcus had arranged for Stowe to come up directly from his office on the 4th floor, the property management suite, and he arrived looking as though he had spent the intervening hours trying to figure out exactly how much trouble he was in. The answer was considerable. Linda had reviewed the lobby security footage. She had documented the interaction. She had also, in the 4 hours since Marcus had called her, quietly pulled together a timeline of Stowe's 6 weeks in the building, including 2 other complaints from tenants that had not yet been formally escalated. One was from the owner of a Ghanaian catering company on the 6th floor, who said Stowe had asked her twice for her Vanner credentials while she was in the lobby waiting for a client. The other was from a building contractor, a black man in work clothes, who had been stopped 3 times at the service entrance by Stowe, asking for documentation that Stowe himself had no authority to require. None of this had reached Elaine before today, because it had not yet risen to the level of a formal complaint. It was the kind of low-grade friction that people absorb and adapt to and mostly don't report, because reporting takes time and energy and faith that something will actually change. Stowe sat down. He looked at Elaine. Then he looked away. Elaine let Linda lead. Linda laid it out plainly: the conduct this morning, the prior complaints, the legal exposure, the professional management standards that governed his role. She was precise and methodical, and did not raise her voice once. Stowe, to his credit, did not try to claim he hadn't done anything. He tried briefly to explain. He said he hadn't been given adequate orientation to the ownership structure. He said no one had told him what the building's majority owner looked like. He said he was just following standard security protocols. Linda nodded at each of these points as though she found them interesting. Then she said, "Those are explanations, Mr. Stowe. They're not defenses." His contract was terminated that afternoon. The decision was clean, documented, and reviewed by outside counsel. The Caldwell Group's HR director, a woman named Paulette Mensah, who had been with the company for 11 years, handled the exit. The contractor, who had been stopped at the service entrance, was contacted directly by Elaine's office and offered an apology and priority consideration for upcoming building maintenance contracts. The catering company owner, her name was Abena Asante, and her company had been in the building for 2 years, received a personal call from Elaine herself. That call lasted 40 minutes. It was mostly not about the incident. It was about business, about where Abena wanted to take her company, about the commercial lease she was about to come up for renewal, about the fact that the kitchen space on 6 wasn't quite right for what she was trying to do. Elaine told her about a ground floor unit that was coming available in the spring. Better ventilation, loading access, more foot traffic. Abena Asante signed a 5-year lease for that ground floor unit the following February. Her catering company, which had previously done corporate events exclusively, now runs a lunch service 5 days a week that is, by all accounts, the best food in the Ashford Tower. Rudy Chen, who had watched the lobby incident from the maintenance corridor and said nothing at the time because he hadn't known what to do, came up to Elaine's office 3 days later and apologized. "I should have said something," he said. "Yes," Elaine said simply, "but you called Marcus. That counts." Rudy nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "My mother used to say something like that. You do what you can with what you have in the moment, and then you try to do better." Elaine looked at him. "Mine too," she said. The part of this story that didn't make it into the brief internal communications that followed, the part that isn't in any HR file or legal document, is what happened the Thursday after. Elaine was back in the lobby at her usual time. Same gray coat, same coffee, same worn boots. She stood for a moment in the marble lobby, her mother's name adorned indirectly. Through 26 years of work, through 14 months of negotiation, through $4,000, and a cracked dashboard and a desk above a dry cleaner on Danforth Avenue. She stood there in the quiet before the building filled up, the way she always did, and then she got in the elevator and went to work. Patrick Stowe, for those wondering, filed no legal challenge. He found work at a property management firm in Mississauga the following spring. The firm was smaller. The lobby had no marble. The Caldwell Group, as of this telling, manages 14 properties across Ontario and Quebec. Elaine Whitfield serves on the board of 2 community housing organizations and endowed a scholarship at her mother's high school in Kingston, Jamaica. The Dorothy Caldwell Award for Academic Excellence, given each year to a graduating student who intends to study business or law. The gray coat, Elaine finally replaced it last winter. She bought a new one, charcoal, well-fitted, good wool. She debated it for longer than anyone who knew her would probably expect. She kept the old one. It's hanging in her office on the 22nd floor, on the hook behind the door. Right where she put it the morning she walked back in from that elevator and sat down at her desk and opened the Tuesday operations report like nothing in the world was going to stop her from doing exactly what she came there to do.